You're sitting in front of young kids on an airplane. They're kicking your seat over and over. You give the parents a look, then you say something. But one person in particular used the line, "Please control your children."
Carl slumped into his seat on the packed airplane and shut his eyes, hoping the long flight would pass quickly. Just as the cabin doors shut and the flight attendants began their final checks, he felt a sudden thud against the back of his seat. He turned around and spotted a little boy, probably around 6 or 7, sitting right behind him. The kid had a cheeky grin on his face as he kicked the seat again. "Hey there, could you stop kicking my seat?" Carl asked, keeping his voice calm and friendly, trying to nip the problem in the bud. The boy's mom was sitting beside him, completely lost in a magazine. She didn't glance up or say anything to her son. The boy's grin only grew wider as he leaned back and kicked Carl's seat again, harder this time. Carl's jaw tightened. This was the last thing he needed for the next 5 hours. He thought about asking the mom to step in, but didn't want to make a scene. As the plane started speeding down the runway, the kicks kept coming, each one jerking his seat forward. Carl exhaled slowly and braced himself for more, realizing this was going to be one long, uncomfortable flight. But before we start, smash that like button and subscribe if you haven't. Just a few hours earlier, Carl had been in a completely different headspace. After wrapping up a short business trip in Boston, he had arrived at the airport feeling calm and even a bit proud. The past few days had been intense, nonstop meetings, presentations, and high-stakes conversations. As a senior project manager at a top tech company, Carl was used to the pressure. But this trip had felt especially important, with client negotiations that could seriously impact the company's numbers for the quarter. His days had been packed with back-to-back meetings, each demanding his full focus. Even his evenings weren't quiet. There were networking dinners and long strategy talks with his team. He barely slept, with numbers and deadlines racing through his mind the whole time. Still, despite the mental and physical drain, Carl felt good. He'd landed a deal that had real potential, the kind of outcome that made all the stress and long hours worth it. These rare wins reminded him why he pushed himself so hard in the first place. Now, waiting at the gate, Carl just wanted a moment to breathe. He needed time to unwind, think through everything that had happened on the trip, and mentally gear up for what was coming next. This flight was supposed to be his reset, a short break from the nonstop grind of work. He leaned back in the stiff plastic chair, checking his watch for what felt like the 100th time. Only 10 more minutes until boarding. He exhaled slowly, feeling a bit of relief. After the nonstop stress of the past few days, he was looking forward to finally sinking into his business class seat for the long ride home. As the minutes ticked by, he imagined stretching out, enjoying the leg room, and just having a bit of space. He had paid extra for that comfort, on purpose. After the intense trip, he needed this time to decompress. Right on schedule, the gate agent called for business class passengers to board. Carl stood up quickly and headed to the front, boarding pass ready. He was just a few steps away from what he thought would be a calm, quiet few hours to himself. But as he reached the desk, the agent gave him an apologetic look. "Sir, I'm really sorry, but we have a seating issue. The flight is overbooked, and we no longer have room in business class." Carl's heart sank. All that anticipation turned into a wave of frustration. After everything he'd pushed through this week, he tried to stay calm. "What do you mean overbooked? I paid for that seat weeks ago." The agent nodded with a gentle, understanding tone. "I know, and I do see that in our system. But we had more upgraded passengers than usual show up, and we're completely out of business class seats. I'm really sorry for the inconvenience, but we'll need to reassign you to economy for this flight." Carl tightened his jaw, doing his best to stay composed. He could feel his frustration building. This was not how things were supposed to go. After days of pushing through long meetings and tough decisions, all he had wanted was some space to breathe on the way home. "So let me get this straight," he said, his voice low but firm. "The flight's overbooked, and I'm the one who has to pay for that? I'm supposed to sit cramped in a tiny seat for 5 hours, with barely any room for my legs? He could feel people nearby glancing over. Swallowing the urge to vent more, he took another deep breath, trying to hold it together. I know this is frustrating, Mr. Williams, the agent said gently. We can offer a full refund for the fare difference between business and economy, plus a voucher for a future flight. Carl shook his head. A voucher wouldn't help him feel less drained or make up for how badly he needed some real rest after the brutal trip he'd just wrapped up. He couldn't help thinking about the soft, roomy seat he had carefully picked out and the quiet service in business class that would have let him finally relax. Trying a different approach, he leaned in a little and asked, "Is there any way someone else could be moved to economy instead? I really need that seat today." The agent gave him a sympathetic smile. "I really wish there was, sir, but we're completely out of space in the business cabin. There's nothing more I can offer." Carl grabbed his carry-on bag, his frustration boiling over. The carefully planned flight he had counted on was falling apart. "This is unacceptable," he muttered, trying to keep his voice steady. "I expected better service." Letting out a heavy sigh, he turned and joined the economy boarding line. So much for that peaceful flight home, he thought bitterly. Now, instead of resting, he'd spend the next 5 hours crammed into a tight seat with no chance to unwind. He pictured the economy section, full, noisy, kids crying, people bumping into each other as they squeezed through the aisles. After the nonstop stress of the week, this felt like a final straw. As he waited in the packed line, Carl's frustration only grew. The crowd was overwhelming. Kids darted between legs while tired parents tried to keep things under control. Voices were raised, tempers short. The whole scene only made him more on edge, more irritated. He honestly didn't know how he was going to survive the next 5 hours in that chaos. Finally, after what felt like forever, the agent called his zone. Clutching the new ticket tightly, Carl trudged down the jet bridge and onto the plane. One look at the economy cabin confirmed his fears. It was even tighter and more chaotic than he remembered. People squeezed past each other in the narrow aisles, flight attendants giving helpless looks as they tried to help. Carl slowly made his way down the aisle, scanning the overhead bins for his seat. When he found it, he struggled to wedge his carry-on into a bin already stuffed with bags. After a few awkward pushes and some sore fingers from the sharp metal edges, he finally got it in. Letting out a slow breath, he dropped into his seat. His knees immediately hit the seat back in front of him. He tried shifting around, angling his legs differently, but nothing helped. The space was just too tight. No matter how he twisted or turned, his legs throbbed with discomfort. The woman sitting next to Carl, an older lady with a tight-lipped expression, glanced at him with annoyance. "Would you stop fidgeting so much, young man?" she snapped. "Some of us are trying to rest." "Sorry," Carl muttered, trying to settle back into the stiff seat. This flight was already off to a rough start. He looked longingly toward the front of the plane, where business-class passengers were leaning back in cushy seats, sipping drinks and looking perfectly at ease. Turning to the window, Carl sighed. Just a few hours of discomfort, he told himself, and he'd be home. He tried to stay positive. Maybe he could close his eyes, zone out with some music, and imagine himself far away on a peaceful beach. But that little moment of calm was quickly broken by the not-so-subtle thump of a child's feet against the back of his seat. Right as the cabin doors sealed shut and the flight attendants moved briskly through the aisles for final safety checks, Carl felt a sharp jab to his lower back. He turned slightly to find a young boy, maybe 7 years old, kicking the back of his seat with surprising force. The kid's legs swung freely, hitting the scratchy seat fabric over and over. Next to him, the boy's mother flipped through a magazine, completely unaware or uninterested in what her son was doing. Another kick hit Carl square in the spine. He inhaled slowly, breathing in the recycled air, trying to calm himself. But the kicks kept coming, relentless and frustrating. Carl shut his eyes for a second. Maybe the boy would stop once the plane took off. Maybe it was just nervous energy. As the engines roared louder and the plane started rolling down the runway, Carl tried to focus on steadying his breath, willing himself not to let this annoyance ruin the whole flight. Still, he knew he'd have to say something. If he didn't, this could go on for hours. And he needed to land in Seattle rested and ready. The pressure of his job didn't allow much room for mistakes, and he couldn't afford to show up already worn out. Gathering what patience he had left, Carl turned around, trying to smile despite how drained he felt. "Hey there, could you please stop kicking my seat?" he asked in the kindest voice he could manage. "It's a bit uncomfortable." The boy looked at him with big brown eyes, his head tilted slightly to one side. There was a spark of curiosity in his gaze, like he was deciding whether or not to listen. For a second, Carl thought it might have worked. He gave a hopeful smile and turned back in his seat, letting himself believe that maybe now he'd get the quiet flight he needed. The hum of the engines and soft chatter around him offered a little hope of peace. But then, thump! A firm kick landed on his seat back and Carl winced. The boy's grin had grown wider and now he was back at it, kicking the seat with a steady rhythm like he'd found a new game. Carl's shoulders tensed, his hands curled into fists in his lap. This flight was supposed to be his chance to breathe, to unwind after pushing himself for days. Instead, it was quickly turning into a challenge, one that drained what little energy he had left, pushing his patience to the edge. "Okay, stay calm. Getting upset won't help anything," Carl reminded himself. He took a slow breath, trying to hold on to his patience. This was just a kid being restless. He'd probably get bored of kicking soon. With that thought, Carl worked on pulling himself together, hoping he could still find a way to relax and salvage the flight. As the plane taxied and lifted into the air, Carl leaned back and looked out the window. The clouds outside, soft and still, offered a small escape from the stress. Being this high up usually helped him hit pause on everything, the meetings, the deadlines, the pressure. He tried to focus on that peaceful view, willing himself to ignore the thumps still landing against his seat. But it was impossible to ignore. Each kick felt like a jolt, rattling through the thin seat back and hitting him square in the lower spine. The cushion did nothing to soften the blow. Thud, thud. The kicks kept coming, firm and frequent. Carl couldn't believe how much power the kid had in such tiny legs. The force behind every kick left his back and shoulders aching. He clenched his jaw and tried to stay still, but the hits were getting stronger, more deliberate. The kid was clearly leaning into it now. Carl's fist tightened in his lap as he tried to keep a neutral face. He didn't want to make a scene, but he was close. After a few more hard kicks, something snapped inside him. Carl turned around quickly, shooting a sharp look at the boy. The child's smug grin faded. "You sure have a lot of energy, huh?" Carl said, his voice tight with frustration. A sudden hush fell over the nearby rows as heads turned. Carl could feel the weight of their eyes on him as he turned back around, his heart racing from the confrontation. Maybe, just maybe, that had been enough to catch the mother's attention. But the silence didn't last. The kicking came back, as hard as ever. That was it. Carl turned around again, this time looking directly at the boy's mother. "Excuse me, E," he said, his voice firmer now. "Could you please ask your son to stop kicking my seat? It's really distracting." She finally looked up, her expression flat with mild annoyance. "Oh, kids will be kids," she said with a shrug. "He's just trying to stay busy on a long flight." Carl felt the heat rise in his chest. He tried to keep his cool, but her tone pushed him over the edge. Occupied, at the expense of everyone else's comfort, he snapped. Maybe now would be a good time for a little parenting. Her eyes narrowed. "Excuse me? Are you saying I don't know how to raise my child? Yes, that's exactly what I'm saying, Carl replied, his patience gone. If I had a child, I'd make sure they understood how to respect people's space, especially in a place like this. Their voices rose. The steady hum of the plane couldn't drown out the tension building between them. The kicks kept coming, louder now, like background drums to the argument. Carl's voice grew sharp and pointed. This isn't just about a kid being bored. It's about teaching basic respect, something he clearly hasn't learned. The woman's patience snapped too. Wow, thank you, parenting expert, she said sarcastically. Why don't you tell me exactly how to entertain a kid on a 5-hour flight for your highness's comfort? Carl's face burned with anger. You could start by paying attention to him instead of burying yourself in that magazine. It's not that hard. More passengers turned to watch as the exchange grew louder. Some shook their heads, others muttered to each other. The woman glared at Carl. Maybe if you had kids, you'd get it. But no, you're just another self-centered guy who thinks the whole world needs to revolve around him. Now the cabin buzzed with discomfort. The back and forth was no longer just tense. It was an outright scene. At that moment, a flight attendant approached, trying to defuse the situation. Let's all try to lower our voices, she said calmly. We're disturbing other passengers. But Carl wasn't finished. This isn't just about volume, he said, clearly fed up. It's about respect, something that's clearly missing here. The mother glared. Oh, and I suppose screaming at a mom in front of her kid is your version of respectful? Their fight had turned into a full-blown spectacle. Words were being thrown back and forth like punches. The boy, now sitting still, watched the argument unfold, wide-eyed and silent for the first time. Then, from beside Carl, the elderly woman who had scolded him earlier turned toward him, her tone stern but calm. Young man, that's enough, she said firmly. The boy stopped. Keeping this going is only ruining the flight for everyone around you. Her eyes swept the nearby passengers, many still watching, some looking uncomfortable, others plainly irritated. Carl glanced around and felt his face heat up with embarrassment. He'd been so caught up in the back and forth that he hadn't even noticed how many people were watching. The older woman next to him was right. He had let the moment get the better of him. Letting out a long breath, he turned back toward the window, trying to focus on the calm scene beyond the glass. But just as he began to center himself, the boy's mother, clearly not ready to let things go, added a snide remark. Yes, listen to the lady. Women are always right, aren't they? She said, her voice loud enough for half the cabin to hear. Carl's hands tightened into fists. Her sarcasm reignited the frustration he'd been working so hard to let go of. Every nerve in his body begged him to respond, to give her a piece of his mind. But he didn't. He remembered the elderly woman's words and with effort stayed quiet. He focused on his breathing, trying to calm his nerves. Then came another kick. Carl inhaled deeply. He knew he needed to deal with this the right way, for his own sanity and for everyone else stuck nearby. Slowly he turned and looked at the boy with a soft smile. Hey, buddy, he said in a gentle voice. Do you think you could stop kicking my seat? It's a little hard for me to relax like this. The boy looked back at him, not with defiance this time, but curiosity. Encouraged, Carl added, I get it. It's tough to sit still for so long, but maybe you'd like to draw something instead? I've got a pencil and a notebook in my bag. Just as he reached down to grab the notebook, the boy's mother leaned in with a sharp look. Excuse me, she snapped. Do not speak directly to my child without my permission. Carl froze, surprised. Oh, I was just trying to... he began. She cut him off. I don't know you, so don't talk to my son. If you have something to say it to me, she said flatly, her tone firm. Stunned, Carl nodded slowly, biting back the anger rising again. He had made a real effort to keep things peaceful. I was only trying to help, he muttered. since talking to you clearly doesn't work." He pulled his hand back from his bag and turned forward again, blinking in disbelief. How could someone be this rude? At that point, Carl decided his best option was to stop engaging. He needed to protect his own peace and just let it go. He drew in a long breath, and slowly let it out. He thought of something his mindfulness teacher once said: "Let go of what you can't control." Just as the tension began to slip away and he felt a moment of calm returning. Thump! A hard kick to the back jolted him upright. The piece shattered in an instant. The boy was back at it, clearly encouraged by his mother's attitude. Carl could feel each hit like a drumbeat against his spine. His patience, already worn thin, completely gave out. He couldn't take another minute of this. That's it, Carl thought. If she won't step up, I will. He stared ahead, quiet but tense, mind whirling as he started forming a plan. The kicks continued, but now he barely noticed them. He was too focused on his next move. After a few minutes of quiet thinking, he waved to a passing flight attendant. "Excuse me," he said calmly as she stopped beside him. "Could I please have a cup of water, as cold as possible?" "Of course, sir," she replied with a professional smile and walked off to the galley. Carl waited, still and focused. When she returned, she handed him a small plastic cup filled with ice-cold water. "Here you go." "Thank you," Carl said, holding the cup carefully in both hands. He stared at it for a moment, the chill from the cup seeping into his fingers, his plan now fully formed in his mind. As the flight carried on, Carl felt his whole body tense. He held the icy cup carefully, the cold seeping into his fingers. One glance back confirmed it. The boy was still smirking, legs ready to strike again. His mother hadn't moved an inch, still lost in her magazine, completely unaware or unconcerned about what was going on. Carl inhaled slowly, bracing himself. He had to do this just right. The condensation from the cup ran down to his hand, the chill making him even more alert. Then, right on cue, another sharp kick hit the back of his seat. Carl jerked forward with an exaggerated flinch, making it look like a sudden reflex. In the process, the cup in his hand tilted backward. Cold water splashed out, soaking the woman behind him. She gasped in shock, dropping her magazine as the cold water hit her. A few droplets even landed on the boy, who stopped mid-kick, wide-eyed and stunned. "I'm so sorry," Carl said, spinning around with a look of faux shock. "That kick startled me. I didn't mean to spill the water." The mother sat frozen, clothes damp, her face tight with disbelief. Why would you?" she stammered. Carl stayed calm. "It's just hard to keep your grip on anything when your seat's being kicked over and over again, you know." Around them, passengers began reacting. A few gave Carl supportive nods, their eyes saying, "We get it." They knew exactly what it was like to be on the receiving end of an endless seat kick. But not everyone approved. A few others exchanged disapproving glances, shaking their heads. Carl caught bits of hushed conversations, a grown man, and completely uncalled for, drifting through the air. The boy, who had been all giggles before, was now quiet. His wide eyes flicked between Carl and his mom, the grin completely gone. Whether from surprise, embarrassment, or understanding, it was hard to tell. But the kicking had stopped. A flight attendant arrived with a stack of paper towels. "Is everything all right here?" she asked gently, scanning their row. Before the woman could answer, Carl gave a calm, even voice. "Yes, just a small accident. I got startled and spilled my water." He glanced meaningfully at the boy and his mother. The message landed. The woman, now dabbing at her clothes, avoided his gaze. Her earlier smugness was gone. She looked uncomfortable and quiet. The boy didn't say a word. No more feet hitting Carl's seat. No more games. The rest of the flight passed in rare silence. Carl leaned back, his seat finally still. A faint smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. As the plane began its descent, Carl looked out the window. The clouds drifted by peacefully, and for the first time since takeoff, he felt a little more in control. His plan had worked. The kicking had stopped. And the message, whether gentle or not, had been delivered. But even with the satisfaction, a small feeling tugged at him. Did I overdo it? He hadn't exactly stayed calm the whole time, and some passengers clearly hadn't approved. He shook the thought off. They started it, he told himself. I finished it. Still, as he gathered his things and stood up when the seatbelt sign went off, one thing was clear. Next time, no matter the cost, he was buying that first-class ticket. Thanks for following Carl's story. If you've ever had a flight like this or hope to avoid one, be sure to like, share, and subscribe for more stories like this. Safe travels, and may your seat always stay still.